A few days ago, the world watched with cautious optimism as President Donald Trump announced an upcoming summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Budapest, a meeting that promised to tackle one of the most present global crises, the war in Ukraine. Now, the announcement made after a direct call between the two leaders sparked a flurry of diplomatic activity. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov were swiftly tasked with hammering out the details. But in a surprising turn, the summit was abruptly shelved, leaving many to wonder what changed behind the scenes. To help unpack the diplomatic implications and strategic undercurrents of the cancelled Budapest summit, we're joined by global policy analyst Alexander von Rögen. Thank you so much, Alexander, for joining us at this time.
My pleasure.
It's a pleasure. Now, Budapest is off. What does this cancellation immediately tell us, about the real leverage that the U.S. and Russia currently hold over the battlefield?
Well, I would say everything. The fact is the whole world's talking about it. We're talking about it right now. The fact that it's been called off is a big disappointment, but there's reasons for it. Lavrov told the U.S. envoy that there's not going to be any flexibility on Putin's demands as to where the lines are going to be drawn in the Ukraine, and that is unacceptable, and there was no sense coming to a meeting. And by the fact that Trump laid his foot down and said, if you're going to be unreasonable, there's no need to have a meeting. We let's talk when there's something to talk about that is proper and compromising.
Makes sense. Now, Russia's demands are set to be maximalist due to Donbas control and Zelensky's removal. How do these positions stand up to the UN Charter's principles of sovereignty?
Well, in both cases, they're illegal. It violated international law with the invasion of Donetsk and Kherson and Luhansk, which is currently occupied by the Russians to the major. But you have to understand Putin's mentality here. The line for Ukraine was drawn in the Hungarian memorandum, Budapest memorandum, 1994. Putin had nothing to do with that. He wasn't active in leading the country at that point. But it lacked in conditions for the protection of a sovereign Ukraine, and Putin is taking advantage of that now. The reason he's advanced is because the provinces that are in dispute here had high population percentages of ethnic Russians as well as Ukrainians. And that was the excuse for going in. Ukraine had sponsored militia groups to fight the Russian advances. They were labeled as Nazis because of their tactics and their symbols that they wore. Putin, of course, took advantage of this, and that was popularizing his move against this area because, of course, since the Second World War, the impression of Nazism is something the Russians hold dear to their heart. They lost over 8.7 million of their people in the Second World War. So it's a touchy subject. That was capitalized. The fact that Putin invaded and then he had mock elections in those areas stating that the population wanted to annex themselves to Russia. These elections weren't deemed as legal, and here we are. But these are the issues that he's presented to President Trump. He obviously got a sympathetic ear from President Trump, and Trump wavered on his demands. He went back and forth. Putin has taken advantage of that wavering because he stuck to his conditions, and it's become a war of attrition. He figures the longer we wait, the better chance he has of the Ukraine caving into his demands.
Okay, now speaking of demands, Alexander, Europe is advancing a 140 billion euro aid package for Ukraine. Now, is this financial muzzle finally the shift to proactive EU diplomacy that we have waited for?
Well, let's look at the source of the money. it's not EU's money, it's money it froze from Russia. And it's going to loan that money to the Ukraine to support it. And if Russia compromises and agrees to a treaty, a ceasefire, the end of the war, Euroclean will then repatriate that money to Russia. They will treat it as a loan to the Ukraine. So they're really using Russian money. It's not the EU's money.
All right, so we've also seen, Anchorage and Budapest fail now. What is the observable costly pattern, in President Trump's diplomacy with Putin?
Well, they thought they were going to make a big accord in Alaska. There was a lot of pomp and showmanship during that meeting, with red carpets co-joining, and this was a lead up to peace. Keep in mind, Donald Trump really wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize. So this was prior to the prize being awarded. That ship has sailed now until next year. Trump honestly wants peace, but he's a deal maker. He'll make any deal that results in peace. But you have to be respectful of Ukraine's position and Russia's position. Just getting a peace without conditions, I don't think it's going to happen. There's too many layers to this deal, and there's too many complications because of the ethnicity in Ukraine and Russia, the separation of the Soviet Union and dividing lines in 1994. And this win for Putin has to be symbolic for his actions. He needs to show the Russian people he has a win as well. Donald Trump needs a win by being the master negotiator. And President Zelensky needs to show his people that he's had a win as well in terms of fending off Russia. So how do you balance all those components into a win-win-win situation? I think that's what's causing a delay here.
That's a very important question. Sorry, did you have something else to say?
No.
Okay.
I think the summation is it's complex. Now, the fact that Budapest has been canceled because of what is deemed as unreasonable demands may put something else back on the table, because Trump initially agreed to supply Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. These are long-range missiles that could land in the heart of Moscow. That was a definite threat. After speaking to Putin, that was kind of taken off the table again. Now, the fact that this meeting's been canceled, will it be back on?
Okay, but then we have Hungary's Prime Minister Orban is still pushing for a summit. So does this suggest anything about, his geopolitical ambitions inside both NATO and the EU?
Absolutely. Orban is a big fan of Trump's. He's more authoritarian leader in the EU than other leaders. It's of particular interest to him to help join in a peace negotiation, because Orban kind of has one foot on the Soviet side and one foot in the EU side, as Russia currently provides his energy for Hungary. Cutting that off, Hungary would, if Hungary agreed to the sanctions wanting to be imposed by the EU, Hungary would be the one that suffers the most. He doesn't want that to happen. So to sponsor a meeting by waiving the ICC charges against Putin and giving him diplomatic immunity to come into Budapest and know that he's not going to be arrested is also a strategic point for a summit to be held there. And I think it's in his best interest to help sponsor some kind of a treaty. He will take credit for that, and that'll keep him in the good books for both the EU and Russia.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Alexander, for your time and for speaking on this.